One of the things my son has fallen in love with is a Tuscan bean soup. And it comes in a little dry packet, and it bothers me because there's nothing really fresh about it. It works really well if you're camping, but I didn't like to serve it if we were at home. So I'm doing an Italian garbanzo bean soup for you today that contains a lot of the components that you would find in any other soup, but everything is going to be fresh, so it's going to taste much better, and the cost is going to be pretty much equivalent as well. What I've done here is I've got 2 cans of garbanzo beans, also called chickpeas, and we're going to cook those down with 2 cups of broth. Now I'm using a chicken broth. You could use a vegetable broth. You could even use water, but that would dilute the impact a little bit. I'm also going to add 2 cups of plain water, so there we're going to mellow it out a little bit. Now this is going to be motorboated later or gone through a blender to a degree, so we're going to use things in their whole state pretty much, or without doing a lot of chopping. So I've got 2 big cloves of garlic. You could use smaller ones, increase or decrease the amount as you would choose to do. And then we're just going to bring this to a gentle boil, and we're going to drop it down to a simmer, cover it, and let it cook for about 20 minutes. And the garbanzo beans are going to get really, really soft, which is somewhat surprising since they're already fairly tenderized by going through the canning process, but this is going to soften them up even more. And the bonus is that a lot of the flavor that's in the broth and the garlic is going to go into those beans and really cook them nicely, and the garlic is going to get nice and soft as well. Now while that's working, we can go ahead and get started on the next step. This one you could do later on in the cooking process, or you could do it now. What we're going to do is saute some onion a little bit. So I have a small amount, 2 teaspoons of olive oil, one with a nice flavor. We don't need one that's extra mild for this. I'll let that get just a little bit hot. And I've got, again, they don't need to be finely chopped. You can do them fairly coarsely chopped because we're going to put them through the blender later on, or mash them with a potato masher. So that's going to allow that to soften up. I'm going to cook it about 5 minutes, stirring it relatively often because you don't want it to get too brown. You want it to make sure that it just softens up, starts to get translucent or opaque, and then go from there. Okay, after the 20 minutes, we're ready to check this, and it has cooked plenty of time. You can see that the garlic has started to disintegrate. You can tell when it's cooked enough if you push it against the side and the garlic starts to break up because it's softened a bit. This is a little too flexible to do that very well, but we are ready to move on to the next step. We've also cooked the onion. We got a little bit of browning, but not much. We're going to put those in a blender. Now, a food processor would also work if you prefer to go that way. Get those in there. Now, one of the things that you have the option to make this as smooth as you would like. Now, if you don't want it, if you want it really chunky, at this point you could add the onions to the beans and maybe mash it up a little bit with a potato masher and proceed by adding the rest of the ingredients, and you'd be good to go. I'm going to do part of it this way because I don't want it completely smooth. I want it to still retain some of the texture, but I don't want it completely chunky either, so we're going to kind of go halfway. I've got 2 tablespoons of tomato paste in there, and then, let me double check the recipe, a teaspoon of fresh rosemary. Again, because we're going to put it in the blender, it doesn't have to be very finely chopped. In fact, if you can get it off the stalk and put it in there, you're going to be just fine. Next step is we're going to transfer, part of the bean mixture in here. Now I do want to transfer the garlic. So remember how many heads or cloves of garlic you've put in here, and make sure you get all of those in. And because you don't want anybody to end up with one big piece. And you also want to make sure that you have enough liquid in here that the blender will work well. I'm going to leave the rest of the beans in there, and I'm going to do a little bit of hand mashing on those to get the texture a little bit finer. But first, let's go ahead and get this. Now, we are using something hot in the blender, so if you turn it on like this, the chances are the lid's going to pop off on you. So I like to leave this loose, but still covered a little bit. And And if that looks good for you, it looks good for me. So I'm going to stop at this point. And I have a potato masher. I'm just going to come over here with the other beans. I'm just going to crush them a little bit. I don't want to completely pulverize them. I'm not trying to make them smooth. I just want to ease the texture a bit and make it a little bit chunky so that it'll have a nice feel on the tongue. You'll get some of that feel of the garbanzo beans, sort of like you do refried beans. Right, to this, and you can adjust the amount of salt that you add. I'm adding a half a teaspoon of salt and a half a teaspoon of black pepper. And then next, I'm going to add this mixture that we blended back into the soup kettle. Now, if you decide to blend the whole thing, you're probably going to have to do it in 2 batches unless you have a much larger blender than I do, and that may also be the case with your food processor. So be prepared to have some place to put it in between as you transfer it from one place to the other. Now, this may or may not, depending on how fast you work this, it may or may not need to be reheated. We did it fairly soon. Often it's a good idea to let the cooked mixture rest for about 10 minutes or so before you put it in the blender. That also helps hold down some of the splashing or potential splashing that may happen. I'm adding a teaspoon of fresh lemon juice to this. Now this really makes the flavor sparkle. It doesn't sound like much, and it isn't much. It's just enough to really lighten it up and brighten it up. And then we're going to just stir that in, and we're ready to serve. So it's a very quick meal. However, I'll put this caution on it. This is one of those things that actually is going to taste better for you the second day. So while it's a quick meal today, you may actually want to wait on it and serve it the next day, simply because that flavor really enhances it during that wait time. We're now ready to go, so I'm going to ladle up a nice serving here. This can be a main course. It's smaller amounts. It could be a side dish. It makes a great lunch dish with a light sandwich. And I'm going to put just a little bit of flat leaf parsley on there to make it look pretty, and that's ready to go. I hope you'll try this one. It's Italian garbanzo soup for Oklahoma Gardening. This is Barbara Brown.